Hi everybody and welcome to chapter 18. So now we're getting into an introduction into ecology and the biosphere. So just to let you guys know, ecology is the study of interactions. So interactions between organisms of the same species, interactions between organisms of different species, and interactions between organisms and their environment. What are they doing every day? And this is something that absolutely fascinates me. This is one of my favorite parts of biology is ecology. Why are we doing what we're doing? Like innately, like animal instinct-wise, what are we doing? And not just us, obviously every single organism on the planet, because every single organism on the planet is interacting, either with another species, or their species, or the environment, or the everything. So just everything and anything they're interacting with and they're being affected by. So that's what we're going to be talking about today, and that's what we're going to start with right now. So, again, ecology is the study of interactions, right? Interactions between species and interactions between the environment itself. So we're really looking at what is the animal doing every single day, right? Is it waking up? Like, where is it sleeping? Where is it waking up? What is it eating? Who is it mating with? Again, when is it mating? All of these things are ecological questions that ecologists look to answer when we're studying an organism. And remember, it's very important to understand everything about an animal before we can start doing things like conservation. So if we're trying to save said animal, we need to know everything about it. How fast does it grow? What does it eat? Where does it live? Where does it live at different points of its life? So all these are very important questions that ecologists seek to answer, and that's kind of what we're going to be talking about today. And we're also going to be talking about the biosphere, and hopefully you guys remember from early on in our semester that the biosphere is living circle, right? Bio means life, and sphere means circle. So the living circle is Earth. Right? That is our biosphere. So when we're talking about the biosphere, we're talking about every single ecosystem or every single little habitat on planet Earth. All of the organisms on planet Earth. So at the end of our lecture today, we're going to end up with biomes. These are like major types of ecosystems. And we're going to talk about all that. But yes, you will need to know the difference between all of these. So keep that in mind as we go along our lecture today. Now, when we're talking about interactions, right, the things that these animals are doing and why, there's a couple different factors included in their behavior and why they're doing what they're doing. The first is known as a biotic factor, and a biotic factor is a living factor. Remember, bio still means living. So this is a living factor. So in this case, it would be, competition. You're in competition with another species for food. That is a living factor. That organism is alive, and therefore a living factor, a biotic factor. If you're trying to find food, I guarantee whatever you're eating is probably alive. Even that plant, remember, living organism. You're trying to find food. That is an interaction between living organisms, right? The cow is eating the grass. Those are both living organisms. That is a interaction. That would be considered a biotic factor. So things like predation, mating, competition, all of those are biotic factors, living factors. And then conversely, we have the abiotic factors, and A means non or not. Okay, so not living factors, right? Abiotic factors. So this would be things like the weather, right? How much rain do you have? What is your temperature like? What is the soil pH like? All of these things are non-living factors. The wind is not alive, right? So the wind is not a biotic factor. It would be an abiotic factor. Say you live somewhere where it's very, very windy. That could potentially affect who lives there. Maybe some organisms don't do well in the wind, like little tiny insects, right? They're gone. They can't live in a really, really windy area, but say maybe something that lives low to the ground or even in the ground would be fine in a windy area. So again, these are different things that are going to affect the types of animals that live there and the types of behaviors that they will exhibit in said environment. Now, let's talk about some abiotic factors just for a second. Basically, the abiotic factors are kind of going to be the baseline driving mechanism of who can live there. Remember that little bug that went because it's too windy? That was an abiotic factor. So in that area, if it's really windy, say you live in a valley and there's just constantly wind, you're not going to get a lot of bugs. That's an abiotic factor that drives away the bugs. Say you're living in a desert and it's very, very hot. There's very little water. You're not going to be an animal like a big, healthy, bushy tree with these big, broad leaves. You're not going to be living in the desert because you're not going to have enough water to survive. Okay, so these abiotic factors really determine what's called patterns of distribution. So we see things like succulents that don't need a lot of water. We see those in deserts all the time because they do really well in deserts. We don't see big broadleaf trees and big broadleaf forests in the desert because they don't do well. So these abiotic factors are really kind of the driving factor between who can live where. And usually organisms have some narrow range that they can live in. They, average between this temperature and this temperature, right? And it's usually pretty small. And that's true of a lot of a lot of organisms. Excuse me, when I talk about marine organisms, usually it's things like salinity or the salt, dissolved salt and sediments in the water. So a lot of organisms can only live in a very narrow salinity range. So again, you have these abiotic factors that are determining who can live where. Temperature is a big one. Water availability is another big one. In the ocean, pH is a big one. Like, you're not going to have a lot of marine organisms that will live near freshwater sources. You have to be very adapted to live in, say, estuaries and stuff like that, because the salinity is fluctuating all the time. Whereas if you're in the open ocean, the salinity never fluctuates. So again, all these abiotic factors are really going to determine who lives where. And usually we find these very distinguishable patterns. Like deserts have lizards and succulents and snakes and stuff like that. Things that can survive in very little rainfall and high temperatures. Well, actually very extreme temperatures, because you get very low temperatures in the desert as well as very, very high temperatures in the desert. So that big range of temperature fluctuations, not all organisms can survive. So again, these abiotic factors really are the ones who determine where you can survive on the planet. Now, once you're there, your microhabitat is probably going to be determined by a biotic factor, right? Your predator lives on the ground, so you're probably not going to want to live on that ground right near your predator. You're probably going to want to live up in a tree somewhere away from said predator. So again, you're still in that desert biome, but now maybe you're here versus here. And that's like microhabitat stuff. So that's really going to be determined by biotic factors. But really the big one is abiotic factors, determining, can you live in a desert? Can you live in the ocean? Right? All sorts of things like that. Now, I keep saying this word biome. So what is a biome? So basically it's like a major ecosystem, or major type of ecosystem on the planet. So if we're talking about the desert biome, we're talking about every single desert on the planet. Because every single desert on the planet is a desert because it's a desert. It's the same type of characteristics, right? It has very high heat, very low temperatures sometimes, very little precipitation, right? Very little plant life. You can pretty much only have your succulents and things like that. So again, these are going to be like major characteristics of major zones. We're not just talking about, say, the Mojave Desert here in California, right? We're talking about all deserts everywhere. The Sahara and the Mojave and Death Valley and all of these things are major deserts, right? That are all going to have the same type of characteristic. Are they going to have the exact same animals? No, of course not. Are they going to have the same general type of animals? Yes. So again, like our desert, we're going to have things like small mammals and rodents and stuff like that who can survive underground. We're going to have things like succulent plants who can survive with very little rainfall. You're going to have insects and stuff like that. So again, who survive the same type of environment. Now, is it going to be the same type of ground squirrel that lives in Arizona that lives in, the Middle East? No, of course not. But it is still a type of little small mammal that can live there. So again, these are generalized characteristics of the type of ecosystem that we're talking about. So all deserts are included in the desert biome. Same thing, like all coral reefs are included in the coral reef biome. All tundras, which we're going to talk about what all these are, again, are included in the same tundra. Even though they're not at the exact same place, right? It's the same type of environment. So no matter where on the globe that you go to, if you go to a desert, it's still going to look like a desert, right? Just maybe slightly different community compositions, but generally the same. So that's what we're going to talk about there. Typically, we're going to be characterizing these biomes by things like temperature, rainfall, precipitation, and plant life. So that's kind of like a big basis of the ecosystem. And if you think about an ecosystem, that's kind of what you think about. How much rainfall does the rainforest get? What kind of animals live in the rainforest? What kind of plants live in the rainforest? Right? The rainforest itself creates all those little habitats for the animals. You lose the rainforest, you lose the animals. Okay, so again, it's going to be really categorized by plant life as well as temperature and rainfall and stuff like that. And when it comes to the aquatic environment, it's more like the physical attributes, like the salinity that I talked about, the temperature, right? Do you live in the Arctic? Do you live by the equator? Right? Those are all the temperatures, and the salinities are going to vary, and therefore that's what really categorizes those aquatic environments. Speaking of aquatic environments, let's talk about some aquatic biomes. So you shouldn't be shocked by the fact that our planet Earth is actually mostly water, right? So it's about 75% covered in water. What you probably will be shocked about is how much of that 75% is actually fresh, drinkable water. And that's very, very, very little. So usually when we're talking about aquatic biomes, we either talk about them as freshwater or we talk about them as saltwater. So those are kind of our two characteristics. So they're based on salinity, or again, dissolved salts and other materials and stuff like that. So freshwater biomes, of the 75% on our big, beautiful planet, is about 1%. 1% of this planet is freshwater. And you're like, wait a minute, doesn't every living thing on this planet kind of depend on water? And yeah, pretty much. So this fresh water is very, very scarce in our environment. And therefore, the organisms who depend on strictly freshwater sources, like amphibians, frogs and salamanders and stuff like that, as well as freshwater fishes, right? They're kind of at the mercy of the tiny, tiny little 1% that we actually have on this planet. So it's, and wait, we're going to blow your mind even more, because that 1%, it's not even the actual 1% that we get to use or the animals get to use. In fact, most of that 1% is not even usable to anything. You're like, wait, it's called groundwater. It's actually hidden underwater, or it's frozen. Yeah, all right, so let's talk about that. So we have basically all of our fresh water is going to be found in things like lakes and rivers and streams, right? Well, look around. I mean, here in California, we don't have a ton of lakes and rivers and streams. We got a few, right? There, of course, there are the Great Lakes, those big, beautiful lakes up in the northeast. But, again, all of this fresh water is still only 1%. And most of it, like I said, is not even in the lakes and the rivers and the streams. We're going to talk about where it is. So, let's see. It covers about 1% of the Earth. And let's see. It's about 6% of all the species on the planet depend on fresh water. And you're like, that's actually not a lot. But it is kind of some of the important ones that we do need, or at least some of the ones that we've grown up with, like the frogs, right? Frogs, unfortunately, are taking a huge hit because we're kind of polluting all of our groundwater and polluting all the rest of the water. And then we're doing things like building dams. Right, we're building dams and we're building over these rivers and streams, and that's the freshwater source for all of these amphibians. And so the amphibians are just, their numbers are taking a huge hit, which is really, really sad. Let's look at a picture of where our freshwater is going. So here is all of the water on the entire planet. Okay, and you can see here in green we have 97% about is in the oceans. That is a lot. But that's a lot of salt water. And so we can't exactly drink salt water. If you do, you get dehydrated, and it's actually bad for you because the whole point of drinking water is to get hydrated, right? So the fresh water over here is about 2.5%. And you're like, wait, I thought 1%. Here's where the 1% comes from. So 2.5% of the entire water on our planet is fresh water. However, 69% of that 2.5% is in glaciers and ice caps. So it is frozen. Now, with climate change, that number is quickly decreasing, which is not a good thing because it's dropping really, really quickly, and that's going to change all sorts of things on our planet. Now, 70% is in icers and glacier water. The other 30% is in groundwater. Remember, that's literally water that's stored underground in these basically huge, massive caverns of underground. And sometimes there's springs and the water comes up to the surface and then it flows back down and soaks back in. But this groundwater really is not super accessible. Okay? And then here we go, about 1.2% of the 2.5% is actually on top of and usable fresh water, like the lakes, the rivers, and streams. And then you can see right here, 69% of the 1.2% is still locked up in what's called permafrost. And permafrost is in things like tundras, which we're going to learn about. Its characteristics by permafrost is this frozen basal level of dirt, like a couple inches down, and it's just frozen ice. Ice dirt. And then about 21% of the 1.2% of the 2.5%, so we're talking really, is going to be in lakes. And then finally you have things like rivers, swamp marshes, just naturally floating in the atmosphere. So this is where all of our fresh water goes. So you're like, okay, well 2.5% kind of seems, nope. It's actually 1.2% of the 2.5%. And then, 22% of that? 31% maybe? So very little fresh water for us. Now this is going to eventually kind of be a problem because this water isn't just going to be there forever. So we are looking into ways of kind of doing some desalinization, which basically means taking out the salinity in the ocean water. It's very expensive. It's kind of hard to do. Nobody's really interested in doing it, but there's a lot of fresh water here that we could potentially use. And as we go through things like climate change, we're actually developing droughts that are stronger and longer. So here in California, we've been in a drought for many years, right? And I think it was last year we had all that rain. Everyone's like, we're out of a drought. We are still totally in a drought. Because this drought isn't just like going to be fixed by one rainy year. This is like a 10-year plus drought. So 1 year of rain is not going to cut it. We also have a terrible infrastructure for catching fresh water. We pretty much just let like 90% of it go back into the ocean. And you're like, wait a minute, didn't we need that fresh water? So we're working on things like that. We're working on getting better when it comes to collecting fresh water, figuring out where to get fresh water, how to fix our fresh water from salt water. So all this kind of stuff. But there really is not a ton of water out there. So things to keep in mind. All right, moving on. So some of the actual freshwater biomes, besides the actual, remember we had freshwater and we had saltwater, and now we're actually going into the freshwater. So there's two different types of freshwater biomes. There's what's called standing water and there's what's called moving water, or at least flowing water. So these two groups kind of categorize like what's going on. Are you a lake and a river, right? That's a flowing water, or you're a stream or a river, and then you're flowing water, or you're a lake or a pond, and then you're the standing water. Right? This should not shock you guys. It's either standing still water or moving water. Now we do have, small, tiny little ponds, but we also have massive, giant lakes. So the Great Lakes, which you can see right here again in the upper northeast, is what we have is basically these huge, in fact, some of the largest, if not the largest, freshwater lakes in the world. It's just absolutely massive. And some of them are connected here, you can see right here. But they are fresh water. And they are lakes. Even though if you actually go to the shore of some of these, they'll have waves. And that's because there's such huge vastness, like expanses of water, that as the wind hits the top of the water, it actually creates waves. And so it almost looks like an ocean. In fact, in these Great Lakes, there is a bunch of sunken ships that have gone down because of storms. And you're like, I'm sorry, a ship sank in a lake because of a storm? Yeah, because these lakes are so big. You stand on one edge and you look across, you cannot see the other side. So it really does seem like an ocean, even though it is fresh water. So they can be big, but again, still only covering 2.5% of the ocean, and then the 1.5% of the 2.5% of the 30%. Oh, tiny little bits of water. Now, rivers and streams, again, are usually where people like to live near. So lakes and rivers and streams and all of that are always where people want to be near. They want to be near water, like the ocean as well. So, unfortunately, with these lakes and rivers and streams, you're either living on them and then polluting them, which is a problem for the amphibians, or what you're doing is you're damming them up to get hydroelectric power. There it is. Hydroelectric power. So essentially, these dams are creating energy, which we need, and which is great. It's totally clean water. Clean energy. But what if you're a salmon and you need to go upriver from the ocean to spawn, to have your babies? So when it comes to things like salmon, a lot of these organisms that travel to freshwater to reproduce, go back to the same rivers and streams that they were born in. It's just this innate behavior. They know, I only go to this one. This is the one I go to. So what happens if, 10 years later, you come back and there's a dam right there? Right now, you are never going to reproduce because you're not going to know just to go to the next stream. That was your stream. That was your river. So now you just don't reproduce. So again, it's actually things like creating clean power is affecting natural life. So this is where ecology is such a big deal. We need to understand everything that's going on with these organisms, like the fact that they go from the ocean back to the fresh water to reproduce, because when we start to develop, we don't even understand the kind of ecological implications that we could have. So if we understand, oh no, that salmon is going to need to get up that stream, we can't build a dam here, right? You at least understand we're not going to destroy an ecosystem, destroy a species because we've built one little dam. Right? So luckily, now that ecologists are kind of getting, in tune with all the organisms in these areas, and now we're doing things like environmental studies environmental impact studies to determine, okay, if you build that dam, you're going to impact this and this and this species. So what we're doing is we're still building the dam, but we're getting creative. So this right here is known as a fish bridge. And I did say that correctly, a fish bridge. So what they've done is near this dam, where these fish are just like, I have to get through this dam, I have to get through this dam, and they keep hitting the wall. Like, what did the fish say when he hit a wall? Damn! Dad joke in the middle of a lecture? You guys are so lucky. Anyway, so what they did is they built this little bridge right next to the dam. And essentially what it is, it's like a stepping stone full of water. So they're running the water down, and the fish are like, oh, I can jump from here to here to here to here, because that's normally what they would be doing. Right? Except now there's a huge dam there. So next to the dam, they build this fish bridge. And they go pa-doom, 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 and they can actually work their way up and around the dam. So now the fish get to reproduce, the dam gets to make free power, or cheap power, and everybody wins. So we are getting really, kind of in tune with nature nowadays, and saying, how can we both live? We need power, you need to reproduce. Let's make it mutual. Let's make it a way that we can both survive. And we're actually getting pretty good at this. One of my favorite videos, and I'm not going to show you guys, but you can YouTube this or Google this or whatever. It's like a fish cannon. I'm not even joking. And no, it doesn't go, but it's like a tube. And so there's a suction that happens with the tube on one end of the dam, right? So as the fish is like, I need to get through this dam. How do I get through this dam? It finds a little opening and goes, and it literally just gets sucked in. And the tube goes up and over the dam and around it. So you're looking and you see like 50 feet up in the air, and these are like fish flying by, and these like tubes full of water that are just, oh my god, it looks like the most fun water park ride ever. So I think Raging Waters needs to invent the fish tube, the fish cannon, and shoot us all in tubes over something. I don't know, but it's crazy cool. So again, we are getting better at doing these, at least building this technology so that not only we can get what we want, but the fish and other organisms that live in the area are not affected. So win-win. All right, let's get into a type of freshwater biome that is a standing water biome. This is known as wetlands. So wetlands essentially are a kind of like drowned area. So think of like a valley with grass and small bushes and stuff like that, and you flooded it just a little bit. Not like a ton, but maybe like this much, maybe this much. Not super deep. But it's wetlands, so it's not deep enough to be considered like a lake. It'd be maybe even like a shallow pond. But these are basically essentially kind of like marsh areas. So it's fresh water, but it's kind of marshy, but it's really, really productive. So you have a ton of, so you have fresh water, so you have a ton of organisms that are going to survive on fresh water coming there, including plants. Now you have a huge diversity of plants that's going to draw organisms who eat those plants. Bugs, small rodents, birds, and everything basically else in between. You also have a freshwater environment. So things like frogs can live there, larvae, tadpoles, stuff like that, developing organisms are going to live there. Even if it's only temporarily, you're going to get this very diverse ecosystem. So it's very productive, it's very diverse, which is always what you want. You always want the highest biodiversity or living diversity, right? So you want as many different organisms there as possible to get a nice, healthy ecosystem. If you only have a couple animals or a couple plants there, something could happen that wipes them out and now they're all gone. If you have a lot of different types of animals and plants there, the chance of something wiping everything out is pretty low. And I mean like disease or hunting or predation or something like that. Not just like a fire that's literally going to wipe everything out. Which is not even true, because fires don't wipe everything out. We're going to learn about that. All right. So very, very diverse ecosystem, really great for species diversity, which is always what you want in an ecosystem. Now, marine biomes, right? Marine biomes are non-fresh water. Okay, so the freshwater biomes we already talked about, now these are considered marine, which means they have salt in them. This is a saltwater environment. So their salinity is about 3% or 3.5%, 3.5 parts per thousand, 35 parts per thousand, 3.5%. It's the same thing. You just need to know about 3.5% of it is salt. And so what we look at here is basically everything in the ocean. So including estuaries, because that is, again, sort of fresh water, sort of salt water. It's the area in between the two different biomes. And then you're going to get everything here. So this is a typical picture of what the ocean would look like, you can think of, without any organisms. So here we have the intertidal zone. And the intertidal zone is the area in between tides, intertidal zone. Okay, so the lowest low tide to the highest high tide, everything here is an intertidal zone. You can have the rocky intertidal, like where you go tide pooling. You can have the sandy beach intertidal, like a sandy beach. And pretty much everything else when it comes to intertidals. This area right here is the continental shelf. So of our continent, right here, once you hit the ocean, it kind of starts to drop off. Well, what happens is it kind of goes really shallow for a while, like a gentle slope, and then, right? That gentle slope is the continental shelf. And then as soon as you get that drop off, that's the continental slope. So essentially right here, this is the bottom of the ocean. And now, I'm reaching a continent. Oh, this is the continent of North America, something like that. That's why it's called the continental shelf and the continental slope. The area over the continental shelf is known as the neritic zone. Okay, so anything neritic zone is over that continental shelf. Here in the Pacific Ocean, we have a very short continental shelf. So for us, it only takes a couple miles, and you're way out here in the deep, deep, deep ocean. In the Atlantic, they have a much longer continental shelf, or much wider continental shelf, and therefore sometimes you have to go over 200 miles over here before you actually get to the deep, deep water. Once you do get to the deep, deep water, this is known as the pelagic zone, or the pelagic realm is what it's called in this picture. And that just means the open ocean. You are not associated with land. You are just deep ocean. When you're all the way down here, this is known as the abyssal plain, abyssal zone right here, or the abyss, like that movie, who was probably way before any of you were born. The abyss. They went down to the bottom of the ocean. The photic zone is on top right here. The photic zone means the light zone, or the true light zone. This is where things like photosynthesis are going to happen. Notice that the continental shelf is always in the photic zone. Okay, once you drop below that, this is considered the aphotic zone, or the non-light zone. So it's very dark pretty much all the way through here. This blue area going all the way from the intertidal all the way down is known as the benthic zone. The benthic zone just means the bottom. Okay, so once you hit the actual bottom, that is considered the benthic zone. Okay, that's it. Let's see some organisms who live in each of these areas. So in the photic zone, you're going to have things like phytoplankton, you're going to have corals, you're going to have algae. All of these things need light to live, need light to feed themselves. So they're only going to be found in the photic zone. If you rely on light, you're not going to be in the aphotic zone. Down here in the aphotic zone, you're going to be basically all your deep sea organisms that aren't all the way at the bottom. So your sperm whales, octopus, we have things like deep water sponges and stuff like that. Hatchet fishes and anglerfishes. By the way, anglerfishes are going to be down here, kind of in both region right here. And anglerfishes, those big ones with the jaws and the little glowy thing. In Nemo, yeah, they look super scary and everyone's like, oh my god, I don't want to go to the deep sea. Do you know how big an anglerfish actually is? Probably about that big. Yeah. Well, there's not a ton of food right down in here, so you're not going to get really those big, super big organisms. Now, once you get to the bottom, the very, very bottom, anything that dies anywhere up here is going to settle all the way at the bottom. So once you hit the very bottom of the abyssal plain, there is a ton of food actually down there. So you're going to get some really big organisms like giant tube worms and Greenland sharks and giant squids. Yeah, all sorts of crazy big things are going to live down here. Actually, that's what sperm whales eat. Sperm whales are the world's deepest divers. And they will dive all the way down here to the deep, deep, deep ocean just to feed on sperm whales. Sperm whales feed on giant squid. Have you ever seen a sperm whale? They have like scars all over their face. Those are from giant squid beaks. There's like epic battles going on deep sea we don't even know about. Anyway, let's go a little bit shallower and talk about some coral reefs. Coral reefs are absolutely beautiful. We do not have coral reefs right here off our coast because we are considered temperate water. We are very, very cold water. That's because the way that the gyre works, the North Pacific gyre, we're actually getting all of our waters from Alaska instead of getting all of our waters from the equator like they do on the East Coast, which is why the East Coast is generally warmer and, southern East Coast is generally warmer and more humid because they're getting their waters from the equator. Now, these coral reefs are beautiful because they are crystal clear water, whereas where our waters are dark and murky, and people go, oh, our waters are so polluted. That is not pollution, people. That is primary production. That is phytoplankton. So all that green that you see is actually microorganisms, and that means we have a very healthy ecosystem off of our coast. We have very high levels of primary production, which means we have high levels of everything. Zooplankton, all this kind of stuff, all because we have good nutrients, we have good light, we have good everything, good qualities. Now, you're like, wait a minute, our water is actually better than the tropical waters, and it's depending on what you mean by better. We have more production out here. The tropical waters are crystal clear because they have no production. It's basically too hot for all those little phytoplankton. So the production, the basal level, the first producer level is actually pretty low in the tropics. The coral reefs are actually doing a big part of the primary production. So So the base level of the food chain, or the food web, which we're going to learn about soon, is going to come from the corals itself instead of like phytoplankton and algae and things that are doing photosynthesis. I mean, algae, the corals are doing photosynthesis, but it's actually a symbiotic type of phytoplankton that is doing it. It's a zooxanthellae algae. So it's zooxanthellae that live inside the corals that are actually doing the photosynthesis. So we still have algae, but it's kind of in different forms than we do have out here off our coast. Like, we definitely don't have giant kelp, and kelp forest is in the coral reefs. So it's kind of a trade-off. What do you want? We have big, healthy kelp forests. They have big, healthy coral reefs. Until climate change starts to bleach them all and ocean acidification comes to kill all of our poor corals. And yes, we are going to learn about that, but essentially the CO2, the gas emissions and all this, and the burning of the fossil fuels are releasing so much CO2 into the environment that it gets absorbed into the ocean, and it causes things like ocean acidification. It turns into bicarbonic acid, and essentially it's just turning our ocean into acid, which is killing the poor coral reefs, which is killing the entire coral reef biome. Because if there's no coral reefs, that's the base of the food chain. You're not going to have anything else. So it's a little bit depressing, but can be fixed. Our planet can be fixed if we leave it alone. This pandemic is a great example of what happens when we leave the planet alone. You know, air quality is better. The animals are returning. I mean, there's bears walking down the street and goats running amok, you know. So the animals are thrilled right now. We are all not so happy, but the animals are thrilled. So something to keep in mind. All right, the intertidal zone, again, the area in between the tides, the highest high tide and the lowest low tide is considered the intertidal zone. Most of you living in Southern California have probably been to an intertidal zone at some point in your life, either the beach or one of these little tide pools. Now, these tide pools that we see right here are amazingly diverse. They're super awesome little ecosystems, but they're really hard to live in. You know, they go through these intense temperature fluctuations in a single day. What if the water temperature is like, 50 and the air temperature is like 90, right? That is going to give you a big 40-degree fluctuation in the matter of a few hours. And so most organisms would not be able to survive in these areas, but these organisms have evolved over time to be able to withstand and deal with these really intense fluctuations. So they're not only getting hit by waves constantly, they're exposed during low tide, they're underwater during high tide, they have intense temperature fluctuations, they have intense salinity fluctuations, because in the tide pools, the water can evaporate out, and now there's less water, but still the same amount of salt. Your salinity is going through the roof. Some of these guys, like the little barnacles, they close up and they wait for the next high tide to come in. You can't breathe, you can't eat, and you can't mate until that water comes back in. So crazy, crazy harsh environments. I teach this in my marine biology class. We have a whole lecture just on the intertidal and how hard it is to live there. But the organisms that do really, really well. Estuaries. We talked about estuaries for a second. They're where the fresh water meets the ocean water. So this is kind of a mix. If you are closer to the fresh water, your salinity is going to be a little bit lower. If you're closer to the ocean, the salinity is going to be a little bit higher. So you do have, again, these intense fluctuations between your environmental factors. In most of the case, it's temperature and salinity for these organisms. It's either too hot, too cold, or it's just too salty or not salty enough. So these areas are really, really, really amazingly productive. Like those marshes that we talked about, these estuaries are one of the most productive places in the entire planet. And that's because you have some freshwater organisms that live there, some marine organisms that live there. You usually don't get the same living in the same environment. You get terrestrial organisms that come to feed on the fresh water and maybe even to feed on the marine organisms. You get birds, migrating birds that are going to come because there's a ton of organisms in the water, which means there's going to be food sources, or there's insects because there's going to be fresh water and there's going to be plants. So it's just, and the plants that are there, you have plants that can survive in the saltier waters and the plants that can survive in the fresh waters. Again, you usually don't see the two together. So estuaries are just amazingly diverse and really productive, and unfortunately, we're just destroying all of them. Again, the pollution coming down from the rivers, which really affects the estuaries. The fact that they're so shallow, again, really affects a little bit of pollution or a little bit of fluctuation, and those estuaries are all over the place. They're usually by the beach and by rivers and streams and stuff. People love to live there and therefore are being constantly just built on and degraded and just being built on. So again, estuaries are kind of taking it from every angle, which is just really bad. So we're going to talk about habitat restoration. We're going to talk about ecology and stuff like that. But estuaries, super important, really crucial. We absolutely need them. Oh, and they're also nursery grounds. They're nursery grounds for a ton of species. So some organisms will go into the nursery to pup their, say like sharks and stuff like that, to pup their offspring because it's kind of protected. There's not a lot of predators there. There's not a lot of organisms that can survive there, just like the intertidal. So if you can survive there, man, you've got a ton of food, of protection, and all the resources that you could want. So really, really great productive areas for nursery habitats. But if you lose the estuaries, you lose the nursery habitats, you lose the adults, right? If you're trying to fix that population of leopard sharks, but you take away all the estuaries, the leopard sharks are going to make a comeback. So again, ecological impacts. What happens if we destroy this estuary? You're going to destroy all these different species. So again, this is why we study ecology. We need to know who lives there. Why is it important? What are they doing there? Etc. This is a guy on a boat. On a boat in water. And this is trash. This is just, again, pollution really affects certain areas more than others. Yeah, you can have a lot of trash in the oceans, a really big ocean, still affecting organisms, but not nearly the way it would affect, say, like freshwater sources or estuaries, right? Those estuaries are small, they're shallow, and if you have a ton of pollution coming off those rivers and it's straight into it, nothing's going to be able to survive there. You're definitely not going to have any plants, no light's going to penetrate there. What is that? That's just all garbage and just breaks my heart. All right, so now we're going to get to terrestrial biomes. Now, terrestrial biomes are usually categorized by things like temperature, precipitation, and the plant life present. So, temperature and precipitation are actually going to be caused by the sun. What? The temperature is affected by the sun? And that's because you can see right here, if we're on the equator, you're closer to the sun than you would be if you were, say, in the Arctic. But not only that, you're getting a direct beam of light. Right? A direct shining beam of light directly at you. So you're getting the full brunt, the full frontal face of, that sounds bad, the full frontal of the sun. You're getting direct sun. That's what you're getting. Now, if you're at either of the poles right here, not only are you physically farther away, right, but you're getting an indirect beam of light. So that indirect beam of light is not going to be as strong because you're only essentially getting kind of it at an angle, which is what we see right here. So that's why the poles are so much colder than the equator. It's because we're farther away and we're not getting that direct beam of light directly at us to help warm us up like the equator does. So now when we look at some of these, they're kind of categorized by their location. So it should not shock you, right? The polar ice, are on the poles. Weird, away from the equator. Right? And then the warmest areas are usually going to be right here, which are going to fall along the equator. Just north and just south of the equator is where you get the majority of the deserts. And you're like, wait, shouldn't deserts be right on the equator where it's super hot? No, and that's because of precipitation. So temperature, yeah, but precipitation is a little bit different. So we're going to talk about all these terrestrial biomes. And yes, you will have to know the difference between all these terrestrial biomes. What? Sorry. All right, let's talk about the tropical rainforest. So, this should not shock you guys, but a tropical rainforest actually has a lot of precipitation. So this is our little precipitation gauge right here, and you can see that it's full, which means that it rains a lot. Rainforest, right? Now, it is tropical, so these are warm temperatures. So you can see right here, in green, this is all of our tropical rainforests, and they happen to be falling right along the equator. Weird. And that's because we're going to get lots of heat and we're going to get lots of water. So those are the characteristics of a tropical rainforest. Lots of water, lots of heat. In fact, they're basically raining almost every single day. It just rains all the time. So if you're an organism that lives in, say, the tropical rainforest, fresh water is probably not your biggest concern. However, looking at this picture right here, we can see we have a dense forest. What if you're a plant and you live way in here in this little, right? Sunlight might actually be a factor, right? All these plants are trying to overgrow each other because they're all competing for light. So as a plant, an adaptation might be to grow really tall, really fast, right? Then you're out competing everybody else. You can reach the sun, you can see the sun, you can grow and survive. Okay, so think about each of these adaptations as we're going through each of these biomes to kind of understand what would you need to survive if you live there, right? If you live in the desert, water is an issue. You live in the tropical rainforest, water is not an issue. You have tons of water. In fact, hypothermia might be an issue because you're constantly covered in water. But it's warm, so probably not. But again, things like this are something to think about. Now, when it comes to the dominant species, that is trees, right? We're going to have those big rainforests, hence forest, right? But you're also going to have high species diversity. You have so many little nooks and crannies in that rainforest that you can live pretty much anywhere, right? You can live here or 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 here. There's so many places for you to live. So again, all those little micro habitats create high species diversity because they're all going to be taken by some kind of organism. So it's going to be really great for that. So yeah, the soil nutrients, because everybody's growing really, really fast, there's not a lot of nutrients in the soil. They all get sucked up by the plants. So competing for things like sunlight and soil nutrients are your biggest issue if you're a plant, right? As an animal, you would probably have to deal with heavy competition, right? There's so much species diversity. There's probably a lot of other things either trying to eat you, trying to take your things, trying to take your homes, right? Trying to overgrow you, right? So competition is kind of a big deal here. So these are things to think about in each of these terrestrial biomes. Up next is the savanna. So the savannas are going to be located here in yellow. These are just north and just south of the equator, getting closer towards the deserts, right? So you can see here the temperature is very, very hot. We're still getting that direct beam of sunlight. We are still very, very warm. But in the opposite of the rainforest, precipitation is very, very low, right? So these are going to be right here, like your African plains, right? Your Africa's savannas. So you're going to have very little rainfall, so you can't be an organism that depends on lots of rainfall. So those big, thick, lush rainforest trees would not be able to survive here. Same temperature, sure, not enough water for them. So mostly what you're going to get is you're going to get these grasses down here, and you're going to get some sparse trees, right? Not a ton of trees, not big, thick, heavy, broadleaf trees, right? Probably these more thin, scrawny looking trees because there's just not a lot of water. Tons of sun, not a lot of water. Now, another characteristic of a savanna is fires. And you're like, wait, fires? Yes, fires. Because of all this dry grass, right, with very little precipitation, very, very high heats, you're going to get natural fires. All it takes is wind rubbing two little sticks together to create a spark, and boom, that grassland takes off and is ablaze. So every year we live here in California, every year we get fires because around the winds, especially the Santa Anas, they're warm winds, and they're really, really strong. Trees are going back and forth like this. They're going back and forth. Oh, they're rubbing the sticks together just like you do in Boy Scouts and create a spark. So there's always those theories that, oh, there's a serial arsonist around. It's not a serial arsonist. It's the wind. It's characteristic of the habitat. Wait till we get to Chaparral, which is where we live here in Southern California. Boom, characteristic of fires. Okay, so the fires are actually not necessarily a bad thing because they kill all those little temporary grasses and they replace the nutrients into the soil. So now the soil has a ton of nutrients. So now you got all the sun you need and all the nutrients you need. Oh, but you don't have enough water. So again, all of these different ecosystems have slightly different balances, but still organisms can survive no matter where it is. Organisms will find a way to survive there. Now, these guys do not get do not get a ton of rain, but when they do, it's called the wet season. So it's like this floods almost. So they do get these wet and dry seasons. So when they do get precipitation, it kind of all happens at once. So you'll see these big watering holes like fill up, and even the animals know, hey, we need to share our resources. We've all been through a drought, so that we don't all die. Let's just take it easy when we go to the watering hole. So a lot of animals you'll actually see the predators next to the prey drinking at these watering holes. Because even the animals know that it's really important to have water, and the water only comes every few times a year. And therefore, let's be civil and share the water. Can we take some advice from an animal here? And just maybe share our resources like toilet paper? What's wrong with people? Anyway, even the animals can do this because they understand how important it is for everyone to survive if we all kind of share the water. Then, of course, when they wander away, yeah, that lion's going to go after that gazelle. But still. Yeah. All right. So, periodic fires. If you are a plant, yeah, you kind of need to worry about that. Now, some plants actually need fire to germinate, and that's pretty cool. We're going to talk about that when we get to chaparrals. But if you're an animal, you kind of need to worry about fires, right? And if you're a plant, you need to worry about fires. So, yeah, savannas. All right, moving on to the desert. So here in Southern California, we are in between a chaparral, depending on where you live, or a desert, or kind of a combination between both. Now what you see right here is a pretty nice temperature range, right? It gets really hot, but it can also get kind of cold, right? So, and very low precipitation. That is characteristic of a desert. You never have any rainfall. Very few times a year you're actually going to have some rain in the desert. Now, what you see here is, again, small bushes, very, very small trees, or these really big cactuses. And cactuses are succulents. They can survive with very little rainfall. It's basically how they do photosynthesis, and that's something we learned in the photosynthesis lecture. Hopefully you guys remember that. So they basically conserve whatever water they do get because they live in the desert biome and they understand that water doesn't come, it doesn't come often. So if it does come, you're going to need to get it. Now, in the desert biome, fun fact about the desert biome. If you guys have ever heard, I don't know, you probably didn't because they've solved the mystery now, but there was this desert and they had these rocks that would move. And what would happen is scientists would come out every day and they'd be like, wait a minute, there's like this rock here and there's a trail behind the rock. And they'd pick up the rock and they'd test the rock and they're like, it's just a rock. It's definitely not some other kind of animal or some other kind of alien, but it would move. And every day they would come back for years. They would be like, I don't understand. This rock was here yesterday and now it's here today. Or they come back in a year and you're like, it's here. How did this rock move? How are all these rocks moving? So it totally freaked out scientists. They had no idea what was happening. They finally figured it out. What was happening is because it is a desert, at night, it got so cold that whatever precipitation was there, whatever moisture was there, would freeze. And it would freeze on the ground, creating a tiny little layer of ice. Now, ice is very dense, and so if it forms under the rock, it would actually lift the rock up. And just the simple spinning of the planet while the rock was on ice at night caused it to move just a little bit. And every day the ice would melt and the rock would sit back down. And then at night the ice would freeze and it would move a little bit more. And the next day it would sit back down. So the ice was always gone by the time the scientists got back, but it's literally created that little layer of ice. And because of the spinning of the earth, it created a little tiny shift in the rock. And that's why you see miles of trails of rocks, because this is happening every single night for who knows how many years. I know, that one was cool when we figured that one out. All right, so deserts, very, very hot, very little rain, huge fluctuations through the day, super cold at night, super hot during the day. You either have to store water or go dormant, basically go into hibernation until the water comes back because otherwise you're going to die. A lot of these animals are active at night. The plants are doing, they do this photosynthesis during the day and at night. For day, night, they're doing that. They're opening their stomata at night. They're doing photosynthesis during the day. They're trying to conserve whatever water they can. These animals, again, are usually mostly nocturnal because it's just too hot to go out during the day, so they all come out at night kind of thing. So these are some of the adaptations that you would find in said desert. Moving on to the chaparral. Most people have never heard of a chaparral, despite the fact that that's probably where you live. So anywhere from the Santa Monica Mountains, basically, to where I'm right now here in Chatsworth, and a little bit farther, say, into like Valencia and stuff, this is considered a chaparral. It's basically a Mediterranean climate. So we have hot summers and mildly cold winters. We get things like a decent amount of rain, not a ton of rain. Let's be fair, not that much rain. So definitely more than a desert, but definitely way less than like a rainforest or even, the tropics. But characteristic of fire. So last year when we had all of those crazy amounts of fires, this is not a phenomenon. We live in a chaparral. It's windy, it's dry. There's not big trees. It's mostly just bushes and shrubs. Like if you look at the natural bushes and shrubs light up like that. Right? So there's really fire-prone areas, especially these hills and mountains and stuff. It's very, very hard to maintain. So I think it was our president who last year was like, why is it always California who's burning? Nobody else has this problem. Nobody else lives in a chaparral. Literally, California is probably one of the only chaparrals in the entire United States. So of course we're always burning. We're the only chaparral. And guess what? The ecosystem That's just a characteristic of our ecosystem. We have natural fires. Again, the serial arsonists, we live in a chaparral. They're prone to fires, just like the savannas. You don't see a lion going, why aren't we fixing this? Right? It's just what happens. It's the ecosystem that we live in. It's characteristic. Anyway, so we have low-lying shrubs, we have bushes, we don't have big trees, we don't have a ton of water, but we do have very, nice climate, not super hot, well, let's be fair, super hot in the summer, nice in the winter, not super cold, so this is considered Mediterranean type. And that is the chaparral, that is where we live here. Moving on to our temperate grasslands, this would be the Great Plains of the Americas, right? You can see some, I think this is bison here, because I think all the buffalo are extinct. That is, we're going to talk about that when it talks to over-harvesting in our next couple lectures. But this is a temperate grassland, and it is characteristic of grasses. What? Yes, as you can see right here in this big, beautiful picture, there are no bushes, there are no trees, and that is because there is not a lot of water. There's not a lot of water, but again, all those grasses, as they die, they replace all those nutrients in the soils, so the nutrient level is great. Great for farming, great for grazing, like this guy here, he's just walking around laying out fertilizer, so those grasses are even happier. Also, again, prone to fires. Those grasses will light up like that. All it takes is a little tiny spark and the whole grasslands is on fire. So, just characteristic of these grasslands, right? Luckily, when it comes to these grasslands, they're flat. Way easier to put out a fire if it's flat than on a mountain range, right? Problems with California again, which is why it's so hard to fight our fires. So thank you, our firemen, for going out and fighting our terrible fires in the dangerous mountain hillside. And that's again why the fires shoot up so much and the wind goes through it's just a mess. It's just all sorts of bad. Alright, so pretty much treeless, hence the grasslands, pretty much just grasses. You have lots of grazers. Again, there's so much grass. So you have any kind of grazer is going to love that area, but not too many other organisms, right? Maybe some small mammals, some, insects, but birds for sure. But not too much more than that, because there's not a lot of shelters, not a lot of habitats, not a lot of those microhabitats that say like the rainforest would. So you're not going to get the diversity that you would in like a rainforest. But still, very fertile soils, and very important for things like farming. Here we get to a broadleaf, a temperate broadleaf. So temperate again means like warm in the summers and cold in the winters, but not like super hot and super cold like deserts and tundras and stuff like that. So that's what it means by temperate. So as you can see here, we now have lots of precipitation, which makes sense because this is a broadleaf forest. And a broadleaf means it's a big broadleaf. Like these are my two big broadleaves. Not like a pine needle or like a little tiny leaf, a big broadleaf. Right? These are the ones that also go through those beautiful color changes. So you're going to find these mostly up here in the on the East Coast, right? That's why people go to the Northeast Coast to see the leaves change and the seasons change. That's because these guys all drop their leaves in the wintertime. And their leaves are so big, it takes a lot of nutrients and energy and stuff like that to actually get those big broad leaves to stay alive. In the wintertime, there's just not enough sun and it's not warm enough to efficiently do photosynthesis. So these guys kind of hibernate and they drop all their leaves and then they just wait. And then springtime and then they bring all their leaves back. So that's the color changing, those leaves dropping, all that kind of stuff. That's going to happen with the temperate broadleaf forest. And as you can see, we don't have any on our west coast. Wrong ecosystem. They like it way more rainy than we get it. So that whole dropping of the leaf is called deciduous. A deciduous tree will actually drop its leaves in the wintertime. So it has 4 distinct seasons, unlike say here in California where we have, fall and summer. summer, spring, fall. That's it, winter. It's like a day. They have a ton of moisture, so their trees do get big, right? So they finally have enough moisture to have these, not just like shrubs and bushes, but big trees. And again, most of the time in the wintertime, it is cold. So a lot of the organisms are either going to hibernate or they're going to migrate and then just get out of Dodge kind of thing. So this is what it means by deciduous. Again, they're dropping their leaves in the wintertime. So it's just too cold. There's not enough sunlight, too much cloud cover. So the trees are like, I can't do photosynthesis efficiently. I'm going to store all my chlorophyll and I'm just going to I'm going to hibernate until springtime. Okay. Getting into coniferous forest. A coniferous forest are our cone-bearing trees, right? Even these kind of look like cones, right? Their seeds are kind of like cones, like a pine cone, right? These are kind of like cones. The whole trees are kind of like cones. So this is a coniferous forest. Not the big broadleafs, but more like tiny little needle leaves. And those needle leaves are going to help prevent evaporation. Also, you can see kind of here the northern lights. So these are going to be found up north, right? These are going to be your cold weather trees. And again, those broadleaves would not do good if those trees froze over without dropping their leaves. And even then, they don't do great if they freeze over. So these guys can live farther up north. They don't mind the cold. They don't mind the freezing. So still a good amount of precipitation, especially when it comes to snow and snow melt and stuff like that. And lower temperatures, you know, mild in the summers, but very cold in the winter times. So these are also known as temperate rainforests. So we have the tropical rainforest. Those are in the tropics, near the equator. The coniferous forests are also known as the temperate rainforest, or the, you know, more mild, medium temperatures forests. So these are going to be the cone-bearing ones. They're going to have short winters, longer summers. These animals do hibernate for sure. Like, think about the bears and stuff like that. Or they're going to just deal with the cold, like wolves and stuff like that, who have little, like, dens and stuff, so they can actually, like, warm up, and then they go out and feed. So winter coats, there it is. So thick fur in the winter, thinner fur in the summertime. Think of like a husky, if anybody has or knows a husky, right? They have that undercoat, really thin in the summertime to keep them, you know, nice and cool and moderate, and then real thick in the wintertime to keep them super warm. And if you've ever known a husky or a husky owner, they shed like crazy. That's that winter fur coat. Getting to the tundras, the frozen tundras. They are called frozen tundras because they are frozen. So the top soil, the first few inches, is, you know, soil, but the bottom, everything after that is completely frozen. So you won't have any big trees, you won't have any big bushes or shrubs or anything like that, because their roots won't be able to penetrate down. They're essentially going to hit like a frozen block, and that's it. So a lot of these, you're going to have really small plants and grasses because their roots are shallow. And so their roots wouldn't even be able to penetrate the soil because the soil is permanently frozen. Permafrost is what it's called. And that's what we can see. Well, you can't see right here. We'll see in a second. So very low precipitation, right? This isn't the Arctic, and it's not the temperate rainforest. Sorry, temperate rainforest. Low temperatures, always low. And you can see they're basically right up here, like almost completely to the poles, right? Very north in latitude. So this permafrost, again, permanently frozen subsoil, prevents too many larger plant species from growing there. So it's pretty much going to be your short little grasses and stuff like that. Now in the summertime, it's actually really nice, and these grasses are really nice, and you do have some water and ponds, and especially snowmelt, you're going to get the freshwater stuff. So a lot of migrating animals will go here during the summertime when it's actually pretty pleasant. They'll take off in the wintertime when it's way too cold, but in the summertime it's beautiful. You'll see caribou, you'll see birds, you'll see all sorts of different things wandering around the frozen tundra. Because even though the bottom level is frozen, the top level is not. It thaws out, and therefore you can have things like grasses and insects and birds and food sources and stuff like that. Yeah, a lot of migratory animals. All right. I guess we're not talking about the poles. The poles! We'll finish that up. They're cold, right? They're freaking cold. Freezing cold. Yeah, just cold always. So obviously if you have to live there, that's going to be an issue. So let's talk about, I think we maybe do get to it after this. I'm not sure. All right, let's talk about greenhouse gases. Now, most people are like, oh, greenhouse gases, this is bad. This is not bad. Greenhouse gases are a good thing. So the reason you have a greenhouse is maybe your temperatures outside are cold, but your plants need it warm. So what you do is you put all your plants inside a greenhouse, and you basically, you know, glass it off or plastic it off or whatever you want to do. That's going to trap whatever heat, solar heat comes in, it's going to trap it inside the greenhouse, right? That's going to create a warmer environment. So say even if you live in the cold, you can actually have tropical plants living in a greenhouse. Well, I hate to break it to you, space is cold. Like really freaking cold. If we didn't have the greenhouse effect, our planet would be like, what is it, on average, I don't even remember, it's on average like 30 degrees Celsius colder. Okay, 30 degrees Celsius colder is essentially zero. I'm probably at 27 degrees Celsius right now. So if I'm talking -3, I'm frozen. I'm ice. I'm literally dead. So if the greenhouse effect is a good thing, it actually traps all this stuff and actually heats our planet that way. So not necessarily a bad thing whatsoever. And we're going to see that in just a second. So this is the greenhouse effect, right? We have the sunlight, it comes here, it hits our planet, it bounces back off, but thanks to our atmosphere, which acts like the greenhouse, right, it keeps that warmth in. So now it radiates back down by these gases and protects us and keeps us warm. So there would be no tropics, there would be no, oh my God, our entire planet would be ice and frozen and cold. Even in the equator, it would be cold, right? Maybe we'd be able to survive there, but nowhere else, because it would be so much colder if we didn't have our ozone and our gases to protect us. So most people think this is a bad thing. This is not a bad thing. You know what is a bad thing? Losing our ozone. Losing our ozone layer means we get all this extra sunlight radiation, like, UVA, UVB. Did you know there's a UVC? There is a UVC, but it's blocked by our atmosphere and our ozone layer. If there wasn't, we would have to worry about UVC rays that would also cause all sorts of terrible things. So we luckily have all this heat that's trapped inside of our planet, or keeps our planet nice and warm and habitable. Remember, every organism has a temperature range they can survive in, including us. The biggest parka isn't going to do you a trick, or the hot, best air conditioning is not going to do the trick if the temperatures are all out of whack. So keeping that in mind. Now, unfortunately, when it comes to things like climate change, this is a problem. So remember I told you the droughts are going to get stronger, right? It's true. So we don't call it global warming anymore. We call it climate change because all climates are changing and they're getting more severe. So droughts are getting longer. Floods are getting stronger. Hurricanes are getting stronger. Tornadoes are getting stronger and more numerous. The droughts are going to last longer. The fire seasons, because of the droughts, the fire seasons are going to last longer and be more intense. I mean, half of California was on fire last year. And why? Climate change. Because we've been in a 10-year drought. Normally, we'd get rain every year, so the fire season would be little and sporadic, and we'd be able to, put them out. But now, the winds are up, the heat is up, the fires are unpredictable, we can't even stop them, and they can wipe out entire towns like what happened up north in Pleasantville. So, really horrific stuff, guys, and it is 100% happening. Like, we can watch it with our own eyes. Like I said, with the hurricanes, my dad lives in the Florida Keys. They're experiencing like 2 or 3 Cat 5 storms each year. We're supposed to get one like every 50 years. We're now having like 2 a year, 3 a year. Like, what? That's not normal. And yes, the planet does fluctuate every year, of course. But right now, we've gone from fluctuations to fluctuations. Like, that's not normal. And that's being caused by things like burning the fossil fuels, CO2 emissions, pollution, like all of this stuff is affecting our ecosystem. We're going to get to that. I'm sorry. I digress, but I have to because it's kind of scary. So, these warmer temperatures, you're like, okay, well, yeah, storm systems are getting bad, but those aren't all the time. But even average temperatures changing can be a really big deal. So what we have is sometimes just slightly warmer temperatures can cause big changes. So in this case, these trees right here, the orange ones, are not deciduous trees. They're not changing color because it's the season. These are coniferous trees that should never change color. But what's happening is these bark beetles actually do better when it's warmer. So these are supposed to be cold weather trees. And now all of a sudden the climate is now slowly starting to get warmer, a couple degrees, getting warmer. So now the bark beetles are reproducing more. So now there's more bark beetles that are killing the trees. When it comes to sea turtles are all born with not really a determined sex. It's dependent on the temperature. So as they're developing warmer temperatures, you're going to get more females. So now you have more females, you have less males. Females can't reproduce with other females. The population might die off just because now all turtles are going to be born females because it's just too warm. So it's little things like that, like even changing a couple degrees, and boom, you've shifted now. These whole ecosystems can change because one organism might take over, might do better in warmer weather, and therefore, or colder weather, depending on what it is. The Arctic is getting warmer, but Antarctic is getting colder. So their organisms might not be able to survive because it might get too cold. All sorts of bad. So really, there is no more debate. I hate to tell you, there is no debate. Every single scientist on the planet agrees that climate change is real. is 100% real. There is no fake news here. There is no scientists are saying what we want. It's just the data. You look at the facts and it is true. And it's sad. Right now, we've basically increased it about 1.5 degrees. Doesn't seem like a lot. There are some organisms that cannot survive more than 1.5 degree change, and they will start to die out. And like I said, some organisms are going to be more numerous. Some organisms could potentially be problematic if they become more numerous. So it really is a big deal, and it really is, unfortunately, it's kind of being expedited by us. It's definitely being sped up by us. So these are things that we need to think about in the future. Absolutely, absolutely need to think about in the future. So there's no more debate. It is happening. So we can see this. We can see precipitation patterns changing. Seasons are shifting. Seasons are becoming earlier and later and moving on in the in the year. It's just, like I said, floods are getting stronger. Droughts are getting stronger. Every weather pattern is getting stronger. The East Coast keeps getting hit. I'm tired of this lecture. Keeps getting hit by these massive snowstorms. They're like record cold, which is why people don't think that climate change is real, because they're like, it's not global warming if we're getting more snow than ever. That's why we don't call it global warming anymore. It's climate change. Yes, on average, we're warming. On average, everything is warming a little bit, but it's climate change. Everything is changing, and this is bad news bears, guys. Bad. So, like I said, natural fluctuations have happened historically on our planet for thousands and millions of years, okay? Here's some fluctuations for the last, 2,000 years, okay, when it comes to CO2, something that we produce a lot of. So, let's see. Fluctuation, industry. I'm sorry. That is not a normal fluctuation. 2,000 years, we haven't fluctuated more than, 10? And now we're fluctuating by 150? Can't make this stuff up, guys. It's just the data. It's the facts. We just, as scientists, we don't pick and choose what we want to hear and what we want to express to other people. We tell you the facts. And these are the facts. So, keep this in mind, guys. Keep this in mind. And where's all this coming from? Well, it really is coming from CO2. So we breathe out every day. We breathe out CO2. So the fact that there's 7 billion people on the planet every day breathing out CO2, it's kind of an issue. We also have things like fossil fuels that we burn, right? Our cars, industry, stuff like that. We're pumping out more CO2. Now, normally we have a very mutualistic relationship with an organism that loves CO2. Plants and algae that do photosynthesis. They remove that CO2 out of the environment. Great. Except we're killing all the plants. We're, creating pollution for all the algae. So all the things that could fix our CO2 problem, we're killing off. We're deforesting forests to cutting down trees so we can use the wood, right? But those are the things that could remove the CO2. So really what we need to do is we need to reduce how much CO2 we're putting out, and we need to increase the amount of things that can remove said CO2 out of the environment, like trees, like algae, stuff like that. So there are ways to fix this, guys. The Earth is very resilient and can sustain and can bounce back if we leave it alone. Right now is actually terrible for people, but really great for the environment. The fact that we're not polluting, the fact that we're not doing all these things might have extended animals' lives for years. Plants and other species, they might be around for the next 10 years because we took a 6-month break. It's really like that little 7 billion people taking a 6-month break. And the planet can fix itself. So there are things that we can do. And we are getting better. But this climate change is inevitable if we don't act now. So things to think about, guys. But with that, I don't want to depress you guys too much. So funny dad joke to leave you guys on a positive note. I hope you guys all stay safe and have a wonderful week. And I will see you guys soon for our next lecture.